Good morning, all. Nice to meet you online and to join the Inter-Airport Connect session this morning. So I will be talking through recovery through revolution, and particularly looking at some of technology's role in rebooting aviation. But firstly, let me just introduce myself. So John Reavy, I'm the Director and Principal Account Leader of Mott MacDonald's Aviation team, leading our Europe aviation resources. But my background is quite varied across aviation. Started off in the 1990s in IATA and definitely got hooked in aviation, and have spent a lot of time in the Middle East working with airlines and with airports before joining Mott MacDonald just over 3 years ago here in the UK. So within our Mott MacDonald Aviation team, we have three core disciplines. We are an engineering consultancy predominantly, so we have a group of aviation planners, aviation engineering, but we also do a lot of work in the aviation advisory space. So just starting off in context of what's happened to the industry. As we all know, the industry has been heavily hit, but we do face a stark truth that without our international air transport, there wouldn't have been a pandemic. So as we start to navigate recovery, we do have to think of aviation and our role in the recovery and our role in prevention of future pandemics as well. And the question that we're all asking ourselves is when will demand return? There's a number of forecasts out there, but there's also a number of influencing factors that are controlling how quickly the demand can return. And current estimates are looking like 2024 to 2025 before we can actually see a return to 2019 levels. And so this is despite vaccine rollouts, testing procedures, different protocols being put in place, and travel passes. And the part of that reality is that the global recovery won't be equal. Markets or countries with a domestic market will see their recovery in that market first. And we will then start to see specific O&Ds open up, moving out to regional and finally all markets. And so a great example of this staged recovery is this week on the Trans-Tasman, so Australia and New Zealand. Fantastic to see celebrations in the terminals with those international flights reopening. And that's what's going to be key. It's going to be core O&Ds that start to open up the market. But what has happened is more than just an impact to airline and airport revenues. The industry has lost a significant number of skilled staff. So whilst demand will start to return, we also need to look at how we return the staff into the industry. How do we retrain and how do we recruit staff that have moved on and unfortunately have had to start working in other industries? So demand will start to pick up again. But we need to look at what we do well and do the basics well, innovate. And I'm sure over these 2 days of Inter-Airport Connect, there's a number of presentations that are looking at different innovation ideas of how we use digital strategies in particular to recover our industry. So what does this navigation look like? We do have some challenges. It's certainly not going to be plain sailing. We've got governments who obviously make their decisions and decisions that are not necessarily consistent. So we have seen border closures, border restrictions. We have different rules in different countries regarding pre-flight tests, post-flight tests, tests on arrivals, quarantines from certain destinations, quarantines from all destinations, countries obviously going in and out of lockdowns. And unfortunately, across the globe, we are not in a consistent rollout of the vaccines. So government policies are a strong influencer in the propensity for passengers and demand to increase. And more recently, particularly in France and now in Germany, we're seeing governments push a clear message to start to move domestic flights onto rail. And there's other reasons for that. That's not only to do with pandemic, but it's also to do with trying to be more sustainable in our travel And particularly in some countries, we've already got electric high-speed rail. So governments are trying to make transportation more sustainable as well. So there's a conflicting message for the industry. In terms of airlines, obviously suffering drastically. They're very much in a survivability mode and having to adapt and where they can, open up new markets, change their fleet plans. They've got aircraft grounded. How do they rotate them through maintenance programs while being grounded? How do they open up new routes reacting to government border closures? And also, we've seen some airlines get very creative in terms of how they're reacting to the cargo demand, which has actually increased in certain markets. And as we move into this recovery phase, the airlines will have a big role to play in stimulating the market from a price point of view. And that becomes sort of a new opportunity for airlines of trying to get that demand back. And then you've got COVID itself. We've got continuous variants that of different strains and different strengths and concerns of strains. We've got the vaccine rollout and whether they're actually coping with the new variants and staying on top of the variants. And of course, what are we going to do in terms of health passports? We're seeing a lot of news from IATA with the travel pass, but we need to get to a global standard of what is acceptable and what are the rules behind travel, and a combination of vaccine and testing to allow travel to happen. And of course, across this recovery is what is the role that digital plays. So let's sort of take us through the technology role in rebooting aviation. So I want to break this down into three key steps. First of all is a restore phase. So this is about getting aircraft back in the air. This is our immediate starting point. And it's about using what data is available to us, what systems we already have within our airport environments that either belong to the airport or to the stakeholders within the airport. So the key thing is understanding what we have. Don't jump into investing everything that's on offer. There is a lot in the market, absolutely, but there are already things that you have. So we need to get more out of our existing data so that we are minimizing our investment in this recovery phase, in this restoring phase, and maximizing the outcome from using our data. Once Restore is up and running and in place, we start to understand and learn about customer behavior in the terminal. We start to build the opportunity to improve the customer experience. We start to push messages to customers. How do we use digital to influence where in the terminal the passenger goes? How do we use the data to understand where the peak areas of demand are? Where do we need to focus our non-pharmaceutical interventions from a point of view of COVID transmission? And there might need to be some modification in this phase. The airports already have CCTV cameras, and what we might look to do in this phase is start to put upgrades on those to start to include thermal capability so that we can understand passenger temperatures. It's non-invasive. As I say, the network would already be there for a CCTV, and it would be a minor modification. Queue monitoring is another system the systems that already exist within airports. But how do we modify queue monitoring systems so that it's not just measuring the length of the queue or the number of passengers in the queue? It's starting to measure the space around the queue and around passengers as well. So start to monitor more of the spatial awareness that is available and how we can process a number of passengers through a process point in the terminal. And a key thing here will be how do we communicate with passengers? How do we use the data, push it out to passengers through digital screens within the airports or through mobile apps, and not trying to conflict the messages that either an airline app or an airport app. We need to make sure that all the data from the stakeholders are working together, and be able to do things like route passengers to a quieter security zone in the terminal. Let them know that there is space at another part of the building. And the key thing will be predicting peak hours. So, for example, in the duty-free and the retail, food and beverage spaces, using the data and transactional data so that we understand when the peak hour is happening. If we've got a peak hour pushing through security with sensors and CCTV cameras, we know that that's going to roll on into the duty-free and the departure lounge area. And so start to understand where the passengers are going within the facilities, and start to use that transactional data that already exists. And then we move into a reshape phase. We know airports can't operate in the same way that they used to. So what needs to actually be in place for this new normal for us to keep a sustainable business? Passengers will need to be prepared for a different travel experience as we come out of lockdowns, and the travel experience will be different in different countries. So how do passengers and customers get to know what is expected of them through their journey, both pre-arrival at the airport and processing through the airport? We will start to see the customer journey become more contactless, and digital has a significant point to play in this. Every touch point that a passenger or every process point that a passenger will go through, there is a digital option that can be built to contribute and to improve the experience within that space, and ultimately to build the confidence of the passenger traveling through your facilities or through the airports. But the reshape phase is still very much looking at opportunities to reduce the cost and optimize the flow. And optimize the flow in an environment where demand is starting to grow again. There are some questions as to what does this mean to staff if we move to a more digital and a more contactless environment. And this is where there's a big opportunity to redeploy staff onto customer experience, move staff from a transactional process point into a more service and experience and confidence role, supporting customers through the terminal and changing that experience of what a customer journey looks like and feels like through the terminal. And the important bit will be to set a digital strategy. As I said, in the restore phase, airports can't afford at the moment to buy every solution that's available. So as we start to develop these digital strategies, how do we prioritize our investment? We know health passports are coming, but we also have to deal with our airport as it is today and continue to build that confidence and the contactless journey through the airports. So with the health passports coming, what does it actually mean for the airport? We hear a lot of what it means for the airport and for the airline, and connecting with your bookings, but specific to the airport. What opportunities does an airport have to leverage the health passport data? And ultimately, we need to provide choice. Not all customers are tech savvy. Not all customers will be able to use everything on a mobile phone. So as we go through this digital strategy development, we need to be able to build an element of choice, allow the customer to choose what form of process they want to do. And ultimately, they have to accept that the technology is there to be used, and it is going to be varied. So things that we will start doing in this reshape phase is deploying more sensors, monitoring the customer behavior around the terminal facilities. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is improve performance and experience, so we can get more out of the airport assets, but also start to understand the use of the assets and the condition that they're in, so we can move towards a condition-based monitoring asset strategy, which will allow airports to prolong the life of the assets because they're understanding the data from the sensors that demonstrates the use of certain facilities. So today, we work very much in a predictive maintenance. We plan for our maintenance periods. We plan for when we're going to have shutdowns. We plan for when we're going to do replacements. In a condition-based monitoring system, we fix it as it breaks. So we're spending the money as and when it's needed. But because we would have an environment of sensors and cameras and collecting the data, you start to know as and when it's breaking. So you're able to react in real time while monitoring the data. And the key thing is to define your thresholds. So in a monitoring system, as you start to reach your thresholds, you're then applying the intelligence of how your assets are being used, and you're able to then fix at that point that the threshold is broken down. So, an example in this phase would be understanding the utilization of an escalator. So you are seeing the use of the escalator, you're understanding how many passengers are using it, and at the point it breaks, you're then able to fix it. But because you've got the data and the ability to push information to customers, what you want to do is inform them that the escalator is broken down and be able to direct them to an alternate route. And what this phase then does is starts to help you develop a smart terminal. And you get to a point where you're able to drive your building around your flight schedule. You know where you're able to predict where your passengers are going to go. You know where your departure gates are and your arrival flights are happening. And you can start to switch off elements of your terminal. So you can start to reduce your operational costs as well. So you start to include the things like the lighting, the heating. And from the point of view of your asset, you're then using your data from your customers to understand your utilization of the asset. The third phase is then moving into react. If we don't learn anything from this current year, and as we recover through 2021, then we've missed the opportunity. We need to be primed for future pandemics and for future peaks of COVID-19 and future outbursts. So we need to reconfigure our operations. We need to understand what we've been through and learn from this. And within Mott MacDonald, we've come up with the principles of infrastructure epidemiology and how does that apply to airports. So I'll come back to this in a couple of slides' time. But ultimately, we should have got to the point where we've restored customer confidence. We're managing the risk of virus transmission, but we're very much into a phase here within React that we want terminal capacity increasing again and the peak hours increasing. We also have a role to play in restoring the government confidence in their decision making, as well as the decision making within airlines and airports. And so what we want to do within this phase is understand the health protocols that need to be put in place and be able to be rolled out very quickly as and when either a epidemic or a pandemic is triggered, such that we are reacting immediately, both locally, regionally and globally, and we're able to keep airlines flying and airports busy. An example of this is we already do this within security. We're very good in airports at reacting to security threats, and we have different protocols and different levels that we will move through in airports in specific regions as and when protocols are breached. And we need to now start doing this from a point of view of health as well. And this is where the digital strategy comes in, because we're able to use the data, we're able to build levels of control and use the data to make decisions quickly. And ultimately, staff have a big role to play in this as well. And so if we are providing data and awareness and training to staff, they are then able to react and maintain that passenger confidence. So there are 5 key digital pillars that drive success across the airport. Ultimately, in aviation, safety is a key KPI, and it's no different in a digital pillar as well. So safety and security is paramount. How do we build in the resilience within the system? We want to improve real-time decision making. How do we increase the amount of information that is available to decision makers so that decision is real-time? And ultimately, we are then in a position where we're able to protect the flight schedule and we're able to minimize the flight delays. In terms of controlling costs, operational costs within a terminal facility. You know, in a point now where revenue has been weaker for airports, controlling costs becomes even more critical. And using our data to move to a condition-based asset management system helps to prioritize where those maintenance costs are going to go, but also in the operating environment, knowing how and where, which parts of the facility are being used, where do we need to, where are the opportunities to switch off heating, switch off electricity, and then react to the flight schedule in time for the flight schedule. But a key outcome is about delivering outstanding customer experience. We want to use digital to continue improving our customer experience through our facilities. And a lot of that means giving information to the customers, putting them in charge of some of what they do and how they go through the facility. And you start to personalize the journey. And personalizing the journey then starts to open up new commercial opportunities, because you're able to understand your customer better, you're able to work with your stakeholders in a different way, and you're able to then increase your non-aeronautical revenues as well. And a customer who's traveling through the facility in a more relaxed manner will have a greater propensity to spend. And so that non-aeronautical revenue opportunity starts to grow as the customer experience improves. So just touch quickly on the contactless journey, because for most of us going through an airport facility, we know what the touch points are. We have touch points with the airport, with the airline, with a baggage handler, and there are key transactional points where the move to contactless is ramping up and gaining speed, absolutely. And I'm sure there are a number of presentations touching on different ideas and solutions to the contactless journey over yesterday and today. So I'm not going to focus on any one of these in particular, and I'm certainly not going to focus on specific software solutions. But what I would like to now focus on is infrastructure epidemiology. So 12 months ago, few of us had even heard of the term epidemiologists, let alone understood what they did. And one thing that Mont MacDonald has done, and this was not so well known as well, is that within Mont MacDonald, we are more than simply an engineering consultancy. We have a combination of world-class infrastructure advisory teams across multiple sectors. We also have a world-class health advisory team, and we have world-class human behavioral specialists. And what we've been able to do is to put these three different skill sets together with an idea of how do we develop a safer place, and a safer place being a point of infrastructure that either the passengers or anyone using the infrastructure. So it's not only linked to airports, this can be linked to any facility that people use. And what we wanted to do is develop a quantifiable and measurable relative risk tool. And the key here was not to say which COVID non-pharmaceutical interventions improved your performance, but it's about the combination and understanding the relative transmission risk. And so what we've developed is a scenario-based solution that is based on science. It improves performance whilst managing epidemiological risk that can be measured. And that is the key bit, that can be measured. So we and airports want quantifiable solutions that are based on science rather than simply following the rules. We want to be in control. We want to improve performance whilst managing epidemiological risks. So this presents two objectives. The first one is to maximize your risk reduction, the transmission risk in particular. Then once we've understood the risk reduction from transmission, we want to start to maintain that level of risk whilst increasing the capacity and the throughput of our facilities. So let's quickly walk through an example. In a business as usual space if we take a relative risk of a score of 1 and we start to introduce non-pharmaceutical interventions and we create what would become a minimum viable product. So the absolute minimum we need to do in terms of COVID protection. So social distancing, hand sanitizers, washing hands, etc. And let's just say that brings a relative risk down to 0.7. We then know we've got current COVID restrictions and capacity limitation and border closures, which is automatically forced a reduction in capacity. So our relative risk is now at a 0.5 level. What we want to do as we start to increase demand again is maintain that same relative risk position. So how do we maintain a relative risk at 0.5 whilst increasing capacity? And so what we've done in Mott MacDonald, we've developed a relative risk model of the facility. And every touch point in an airport has a score value, and the score value is determined by a combination of frequency of use, proximity to a passenger, and how close you are when you need to use the facility or the fomite, the touch point, and the duration of the touch. And we've mapped this through an airport journey for both passengers and staff, and start to understand the risk points from a starting point. We're then able to build scenarios that put specific mitigations in place for each individual touch point. And these can range from making it a digital touch point or a contactless touch point to not using the touch point at all. So for example, an elevator button, you can make them contactless, or you can close the elevator. Each intervention reduces the risk of transmission of COVID, but each intervention on its own is also improving the cumulative effect. And what we want to understand is which of the individual interventions are actually the beneficial interventions when you look at the total. And what this does is it assists the prioritization of investment or process change or digital strategy influencing to get you to the point of the greatest relative improvement. So we've built a dashboard within Power BI that allows airports to play the different scenarios on every single touch point. And this is where the tool is important to understand from the point of view of using data. It's not just about how many times a day do you clean the escalator railing. It's about understanding how many passengers actually use the escalator. And so even what we were talking about previously about understanding the data you have, we're able to use that data that airports have and bring that data into our risk modeling tools that creates then a visual and allows you to build a scenario to understand the hot key points within the terminal facility to reduce the risk of transmission of COVID, but allow us to increase the capacity and the throughput in the facility again. So the key thing here is displaying it to an airport environment. So we've got two options here in this touchpoint checkup hotspot. We're able to either display the outputs in a Power BI model where you're able to switch the toggles on and off for each individual touchpoint and fomite to understand the cumulative relative risk moving from a base case through different scenarios. Or we can take the data and overlay it with a passenger throughput in a BIM model so that just visually across your terminal facility in a BIM model, you're able to see where are my hotspots, where are my transmission risk areas within the facility. In my business as usual, if I take my base case, or if I move into a combination of mitigations. And what our tool allows you to do then is to play those scenarios, and very quickly you see the impact on the cumulative effect. So that's just a brief insight into what we've been doing in Mott MacDonald from the point of view of supporting airports, but also supporting other infrastructure environments to move through a period of recovery and towards business as usual again. So in summary, technology's role in rebooting aviation, we propose that there's three key phases. The first phase being restore and getting aircraft back in the air again and passengers traveling. It's key in this phase to use what's available to us. Don't spend time reinventing everything and don't spend time buying everything that is available. Airports already have a lot of data available to them, and across the different stakeholders within the airport, it's how do we start to connect with each other and use that data. Going through a reshape phase, airports can't operate in the same way that they used to. So what is a new efficient terminal look like? How do we start to build and operate on new facilities, our facilities in a new and efficient way? And thirdly, we need to learn. If there's another pandemic and we have to shut down again, that means we've learned nothing. We need to be reactive and quicker to react next time. So thank you all for your time this morning, and also thanks to the team at Inter-Airport Connect for arranging this. Happy to take any questions if there are any. So currently there's no questions. Okay, well there's no questions. So thank you very much all for your time this morning. And enjoy the other sessions through the rest of the day. And thank you also to Inter-Airport Connect. Have a good day. Thanks a lot, everyone.